Today, I'd like to continue our dialogue with Archbishop Gomez, the president of the United States Bishops Conference, about his recent address on reflections on the Church and America's new religions. The Archbishop talks about certain of these new, what he calls, social movements that have arisen. One of them we talked about last time in part two of our series was the social justice movement. Another one he talks about is what he calls wokeness. And I guess what he's referring to is the common term that, somebody kind of goes along and they accept things and then they get woke. And when they get woke, they get very passionate about a certain change that they would like to enact. And so wokeness is sometimes used as kind of a disparaging remark about somebody. They're not really too well grounded. They're not really sincere in their belief. They're kind of sort of going along with things that they might hear. They haven't researched it that well, very superficial. And so they become quote unquote woke. We have a kind of a term that we use in religious language about somebody who is not woke, but somebody who experiences what we call a conversion moment or an aha moment. We used to speak about Christians who were born again. They have a special time of insight, a special time of learning. But woke kind of is a negative term. So, and again, we don't know specifically what the Archbishop is referring to. It doesn't seem like it's really a movement, wokeness. It's just something that is a disparaging remark that is used about somebody who is really not sincere in their beliefs. And perhaps if one wants to engage in dialogue, perhaps not a good term to use. Again, because it lacks specificity, and secondly, because it's very disparaging. Another movement that the Archbishop references in his talk is what he calls identity politics. And I guess identity politics would refer to placing a label on a person, giving them a certain position, and again, probably not a movement, but maybe a characteristic of some commentators who might want to say, well, you're on the right, you're on the left, you're progressive, you're conservative, give them an identity. But again, those would be just labels that one would put on a person, and again, not too helpful for dialogue because we don't know what their position, what their beliefs, what they've researched, what they've come up with. Is it something that is workable? Is it a good solution? Is it something that we should reject? Again, very vague. Another movement that the Archbishop references is what he calls intersectionality, which really refers to kind of combining different movements and ideas and bringing them together so that we're not compartmentalizing ideas and peoples, but really bringing them together. But again, is that a movement? It doesn't seem to really be a movement. Maybe it's a characteristic of certain groups combining, trying to accomplish change with other groups. And of course, there are so many different groups and subgroups, it's sometimes hard to follow them all. But intersectionality, really kind of, again, a vague term. And then successor ideology is the final one that the Archbishop mentions. And successor ideology, meaning, one has one ideology or belief, and then it evolves, and there's a successor one, and maybe a successor to the successor, and it can go, kind of go on and on. And he says that all of these movements, this movement for social justice, wokeness, identity politics, intersectionality, and successor ideology, they all claim to offer what religion provides. But again, unless we know a specific movement, what are they offering? Religion provides a relationship with God, a binding with God, a closeness with God. Are these movements really offering that? or are they offering suggestions, possibilities for change? So again, we would have to have a further dialogue, I guess, in terms of what the bishop specifically is referring to. And he kind of defines it a little bit more. He says what it is they give people a sense of meaning, a purpose for living, and the feeling of belonging to a community. Now, certainly, that would be part of religion, right? Religion gives us a sense of meaning. It gives us a purpose for living. We're living to love God and love our neighbor, and we belong to a community with religious groupings, and certainly that's part of it. But it seems that religion certainly would involve more because the relationship with God is not part of it. And there are many social movements, certainly, that provide those things for people. Say, for example, a fraternity would provide a college fraternity sense of meaning, purpose for living. They live together in community. So there are many groupings within society that provide these things, but would they necessarily be considered to be a religion? So different movements for social change do give one a focus, but it's really the purpose is to improve society, to make society more just, to create more equality, to help people who have been disadvantaged in some way, people that have been on the margins, as Pope Francis refers to it. So again, this idea that they are religions would be something for further dialogue. He claims that they have their own story of salvation, and they say the story of salvation goes like this. Our particular group is suffering. We must struggle against our oppressors by waging a battle for political and cultural power to create a society of equity. Well, is this a story of salvation? I think that is a misnaming of what is happening. It really isn't about salvation. Salvation refers to, specifically in a religious sense, what it refers to is justice, really trying to make things more equitable. Certainly, there is a struggle. There are those who resist change. If someone is in a group where they are powerful, they're comfortable, they're advantaged, they're not going to be open, obviously, to change. We've seen this time and time again in history and time in our own country. Classic example, of course, would be in the South, in terms of slavery, Reconstruction, all of that. People aren't going to give up their sense of privilege without a struggle. There has to be some sort of struggle against it. People aren't just going to say, "Oh yes, I recognize your struggle, and yeah, I'll change and I'll do this and I'll do." But no, that doesn't seem to be the way that change occurs. There is a struggle, and there are people who oppress other people. But is it salvation, or is it a struggle for justice? I think it might be a misnaming to say it is a story of salvation. It doesn't seem to be salvation involved. Salvation really referring to eternal salvation. When we're saved in a situation, just maybe our particular circumstances are improved, we have additional opportunities. So if I want to get a house in a certain neighborhood and I'm not sold that house because of the color of my skin or my nationality or my religious background, well, someone is oppressing me, and I might have to struggle against that. Obviously, I might have to have a lawsuit or some type of action against that. Some people aren't just going to say, "Oh, yes, I'll sell you the house, no problem." Sometimes it does involve a struggle, as the Archbishop points out. But is that a story of salvation? Am I saved if I get that house? Well, I think that might be an overstatement. It's nice that I get the house, but I'm not really saved. Um, He says the stories of salvation of these particular movements display simplicity of explanation. They're simplistic, and certainly they well could be simplistic, but we don't know We simply don't know to what the Archbishop is referring here. So we don't know specifically how simplistic they are or what their simplistic aspects are, because they're never really named except in vague generalities. As we continue, we'll take a look at part 4 of the Archbishop's presentation.